Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at a privacy notice. So I'm familiar with some of the Pokémon products, but not all of them. I know they're related to games. This notice was last updated October 8th, 2025. I wanted us to review this particular notice because of the children. So in the United States specifically, and I know this is geography to geography, and actually it's something that businesses should take into consideration. When you're processing the personal data of children, or you anticipate that you will, you need to be looking at privacy not just from a state perspective, which is COPPA, but you also need to be looking at the introduction of specific requirements in different state geographies in the United States, because there are additional restrictions you might have to adhere to. Today's review, we're not going to look at the general notice, we're going to look at the children's one. I want to do a variety of content on the channel. I think it's really important to talk about the changes in the processing of children's personal data. In addition to this, there have been a number of different regulatory actions related to organizations that did not adhere to processing children's personal data in a manner that was consistent with the law. So we're going to look at the children's one. So here we see Supplemental Kids Privacy Notice. Pokémon has developed its services with the goal of creating an enjoyable experience for all users. Building on the general notice, we recognize the need to provide additional privacy protections when kids visit the services. The Kids Privacy Notice is designed to answer your questions regarding our privacy policies and principles with respect to kids. I think one thing that would be very valuable is to understand all of the services. That's really important. I think I go into a lot of detail on many of my privacy reviews, and I like to talk about how scope is very important. I don't know the full spectrum of services offered by Pokémon. We can see here that they do have games and apps, but one thing that's really valuable for your privacy counsel to know is really how those games and apps work, because that will dictate what type of insights you provide on your notice. So as used in this notice, children, child, and kids referred to children under the age of 13. Now this is very important. So under the federal privacy legislation, COPPA, the age of what is considered a child is under the age of 13. This is going to differ from geography to geography. In some European Union countries, this is not the age that is considered a child. It's different in other geographies, so you need to take that into consideration if you're a global organization. This, it appears, is specific to the United States. Now, if we look at the URL, although it's not indicative, we can see it says Pokemon.com/US. Now, it may be that if this notice is being presented in other geographies, this age will change. And I've also done reviews on this channel where we've looked at a privacy notice that is being presented to European Union residents, and then a privacy notice that is being presented to US residents. The geography always matters from a data protection standpoint, and is something that every business should take into consideration. Where are my products and services provided, and am I showing the appropriate notice to the residents whose data I am going to process? Some of the reviews we've done on this channel have dictated notices that are global, and whenever you see the word global in a notice, you can know that the business or organization is looking at privacy from a global sphere. Also, when we use the term parent, we include legal guardians. Please note the supplemental notice does not apply to Pokémon Center. I talked about scope just a minute ago. It's really important to dictate what's in scope, what is not in scope. Now, this sentence, as far as I'm concerned, this kid privacy notice is designed to answer your questions regarding our privacy policies and principles with respect to kids. They don't qualify which game or app is applicable in this sentence, but they do qualify it here. So I presume that Pokémon Center has its own alternative notice because it's not included in what we're about to read here. Our guests can use some of our services, view content, and enjoy many features without registering for an account or a collection of any personal data subject to COPPA. And COPPA is the law that I had dictated on the federal level. Outside of COPPA, states have additional nuances that businesses should be aware of if they are going to have a service that is directed at children. Now, the other nuance I want to add about processing of children's data is the fact that I wanted to say that businesses shouldn't just be looking at this from a federal and state level. The language and thresholds in the applicable legislation matters. And what I mean by that is businesses can sometimes get caught in crosshairs with regulators when they go off of the determination that their business doesn't provide services to children. There's language in certain privacy legislation for children that also encompasses the understanding that children's data may implicitly be collected. And what do I mean by that? Let's say, for instance, the service is for parents, right? It's a service that's for parents, but in providing that service to parents, there is an understanding that there may be questions that a business is obtaining. There may be answers that a business is obtaining from the parents that implicitly collects their children's information. In that respect, a business also needs to take into consideration privacy laws that are associated with children, even though the service is directed at parents. I'll give a good example of that. Let's say, for example, a HR provider that provides a service for health and wellness to parents, like employees, right? It's not really necessarily targeted at children. It's for employees to have health and wellness plans. But in having those health and wellness plans, maybe this provider has a creche or a daycare center for the employees to place their children while they obtain the wellness services. Although the service is directed at the parents, there is an understanding that children's data may be collected, and that needs to be observed by the business. Let's keep going through this. If a user has indicated that they are a child when trying to create a Pokémon account, we will collect a parent's email address and obtain verifiable parental consent before allowing the kid to provide any additional personal information. See below how we seek the parental consent. Okay. Once we obtain parental consent, a kid can use our services much like any other user, and we may collect from the kid the same types of personal information and use and disclose that information for the same purposes as described in the general privacy notice, with the exception that Pokémon does not, nor does it allow third parties to collect kids' personal information, including persistent identifiers, for targeted advertising, amassing a profile, or any purpose other than to support its internal operations unless we have obtained explicit prior consent. Now, I want to highlight this because if you look specifically at state privacy legislation and how it deals with obligations it places on businesses related to children's personal data, that is why we are seeing this here. States have gone ahead and made additional restrictions on businesses on how they can process children's personal data outside of those provided for under COPPA, which is why we're seeing this disclaimer here. In the general notice, I presume, there is allowance for third parties to collect adults' information for targeted advertising, but that's not something that's allowed related to children's personal data. And what's happening potentially on the back end is there are filters that identify if somebody is a child, there's a certain manner in which we can process personal data. Now, I've talked a lot on this channel about privacy in practice and then the privacy notice that's displayed to consumers. What you're seeing and what I'm seeing as a consumer is what this organization claims to be doing internally. What they're stating here is they don't allow third parties to collect children's information for targeted advertising. Now, internally, what's likely happening is there is a policy documentation that is distributed to employees of this organization that dictates what should happen when a child is using the services. And there has to be filters in place when it comes to the children's information to ensure that third parties aren't allowed to obtain the children's personal information for targeted advertising. Now, something that a regulator is going to take into consideration is they're going to read this at its face value. If this organization is saying we definitely don't do this, but on the back end there are third parties that they are allowing to target children, then they're going to be non-compliant with the law, and then they also could be in jeopardy of being deceptive from FTC Act Section 5 perspective. I've talked a lot about that federal law and how the FTC as a regulator uses it to put enforcement actions on businesses that are misleading or deceptive in their privacy practices. And as part of your privacy practice is displaying this notice and being transparent about how you use personal data. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you are interested in any other reviews related to notices for children, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another review.